This is chapter number 6, Peasants and Farmers. Peasants and farmers we are talking about. So we will talk about the peasants and farmers, especially end of the 18th century and starting of the 19th century. So we'll divide the discussion into three parts. First is we'll talk about England. Why England? I'll just tell you. What was happening there with peasants and farmers? So first we'll talk about England. Then we'll talk about America. And then the peasants and farmer in India, that is Bengal. Now, what are the similarities and what are the events which took place? You will see that a lot of similarity is there. What we have discussed in the previous discussions is about the pastures and forest and how these shifting cultivators, pastoral groups and tribals, they got affected because of the restrictions and controls of the governments or the colonial governments. So as I said, we will talk about small cottagers in England first, and then wheat farmers of the USA, and then finally we will discuss about the opium producers of Bengal. Now, because of this modern agriculture which came in, how things change, and the capitalist market or world market, because of the changes in different parts of world, how the lives of peasants and farmers change. So why we are discussing England first? Because of the agriculture revolution first occurred here. So we'll start with an event and see, when I talk about this event, there will be a culmination of this event here, and this is the culmination, that is the Captain Swing riots we are talking about. So we will talk about an event and then we'll come in the conclusion saying that this riots happened. So when the riot happened, when something of this sort happens, there are chain of events. So what are these chain of events which took place in England so that this riot came into picture? And what were these riots? We'll talk about. The first thing is, on 1st June 1830, a farmer in the northwest of England, he found his barn and haystack reduced to ashes by fire. And this fire, this just doesn't happen to this farmer. This happened to numerous districts. Fire, sometimes the only the rick was burned, sometimes entire farmhouse was burned. And on the night of 28 August 1830, a threshing machine, we'll talk about this threshing machine because this was the event which culminated into the riots. So the threshing machine of a farmer was destroyed by laborers in East Kent in England. And after that, there were around 387 threshing machines which were broken. And now the farmers received a threatening letter. So there was a letter urging them to stop using these threshing machines that deprived the workmen from their livelihood. So there was a letter. Farmers were getting letter, and in the you see this letter was signed by Captain Swing. That is the name came from. And this was happening a lot, so government took stern action, and around 1976 prisoners were tried. 9 of them were hanged, 505 transported, over 450 to Australia, and 644 were put behind bars because of these things which were happening. Now this Captain Swing is a mystic name, but who were the people who were supporting this swing? Why this was happening, and why were these threshing machine being destroyed? So this was the event of riots, but we will see now what actually infuriated things or those events which took place. Over the late 18th and 19th centuries, the English countryside, it changed dramatically, because before this time, large parts of England, the countryside was open. It was not partitioned into very enclosed land that are privately owned by landlords. So peasants, they cultivated on a strip of land around the village they lived on. That is, this is the village. So they used to cultivate here, and this is an open land. Everyone could, either you or me, this is open to us. So what happens at the beginning of each year, a public meeting, each villager, say this one, you or me, they are given certain land, and because all the lands are not of same type, the good land, that is where cultivation is possible, is given, a part of this is given to him, and a part of land which is not cultivable is given to him. That is, a kind of equilibrium is maintained. The good and bad land is being given to everyone. Now all villagers, they have access to these commons. So this is the common area, everyone could access this, right? So these places, the villagers, their cow and their sheep grazed. They could collect the fuel wood for fire, berries and fruit for food. They also could fish, and there are certain things, they can also hunt rabbit. And for the poor people, this common land which is owned by everyone is very much essential for their survival, because they can access them, and if they have some problem, then this always help them in bad times if the crop failed. Now, how the things changed when the price of wool, now this is very important event, when the price of wool went up in the world market in the 16th century, the farmers which were rich, they wanted to expand this wool production, because this was a profit earning business. So they now want to improve the sheep breeds and also want to ensure them good food. For that, what they need to do, they need to control large areas of land in compact blocks to allow improved breeding. So what they did, they began dividing and enclosing common land and building hedges around their holdings to separate their property from others. That is, say this is a rich farmer. Now he has this land. Now he made this land this much bigger. Why? He took the commons land, the land which belonged to everyone, because he wanted to earn profit from wool. Now because of this area belonged to commons, and those villagers who had small cottages in this common, they were just pushed off, and they are prevented from entering this enclosed area. So they have put a hedge also, that is a boundary, bada bandi they have done. And this was pretty slow previously, and it was also not supported by the state of church. But after the mid 18th century, this enclosure, this hedging or this boundary making, this came into picture, and between 1750 to 1850, 6 million acres of land was enclosed. You can understand that in just mere 100 years, 6 million acres of land was enclosed, which were actually commons land. And also British Parliament did the same thing. They passed 4,000 acts, that is, they legalized these enclosures. If I can give you an idea through a picture, this is the rioting which was taking place, and these are the numbers in the circle given how many threshing machines were broken. See, in this area it is 85 machines are broken, or broken by some people who are Captain Swing supporters or sympathetic to this movement. Now this first thing happened was the wool, that is, they want to increase the profit through wool. Then another thing happened, which is the demand of grain. Previously it was sheep farming, but now in the late 18th century, the lands are being enclosed because the farmers wanted to grow grain production. So now here the idea of getting more land is changing. From mid 18th century, the English population rose exponentially. That is, it went from 7 million to 30 million. That is, from 1750 it was 7 million, and then in 1850 it was 21 million, and in 1900 it rose to 30 million. That is, people increase. That means the food grains also need to be increased in order to feed the population. And also at that time Britain was industrializing, and most of the people, they are going to urban areas. When people go to urban areas, they have to depend on the market for food grains. They are not producing themselves. So that is why the food grain market expanded actually rapidly. So that is how this Balabandi or the enclosure also increased. And then one more thing happened. France was at war with England. Now the import of food grain from the Europe was disrupted because of the war, and the price of food grain, they rocketed actually. And this also encouraged the landowners to enclose their land, to enlarge the area of grain under cultivation. So this enclosure, if this is the farmer, big farmer, he has enclosed the area from this area to this area. Why? First was wool, then for food grains, and then because of the shortage of import of food grains because of war with France. If you see, the price is how it hiked. This is from 1770 around to 1850. So if you see here at 1815 around, this rose exponentially, and this price, this is shilling per bushel. Bushel is a measure of capacity and shilling is the English currency. 20 shilling is equal to 1 pound. That is 100 paisa is equal to 1 rupee. So you can understand like this: 1 pound is equivalent to 1 rupee here. So this is how the price hiked, and because of this reason, this Balabandi, or you can say the enclosure, increased. Here is a picture being shown by a painter called John Constable. So he wanted to show that how much open land was there and how these hedges were being formed. So these are the enclosures. These are hedges, enclosures, or the boundary, you can say. And these are the enclosures of common field by parliamentary acts. These areas which are below 5, that is the percentages of the enclosure, and if you see these central areas, these have high, that is 50 or above enclosures. As we said, there is one more thing which was very dramatic at that time in 1780s. What happens when the population rises? The food is always in shortage, but in England it happened in reciprocal way. That is, the food grain production increased as the population increased. In fact, the grain production in 1868, the English people or England was producing 80% of the food by themselves, by itself. Only 20% was being imported. And now this increase in food grain was not made possible not by any radical innovation in agriculture technology. They were doing it by themselves only, right? So how they were doing? They were actually capturing the pasture lands. They were carving up the open fields, cutting up the forest commons and taking over the marshes, and also turn larger and larger area into agriculture fields. So when they have larger agriculture field, the food production, or you can say the grain production, is higher. But they also use some or the other simple innovations. I'll just give you an example. What were the innovations? In 1660s, they started growing turnip and clover. Now this turnip and clover, scientifically if you see, they provide nitrogen access to the soil. So because of this excess nitrogen, the soil becomes fertile. So these are the things which added up in the you can say production of good crop or good grains. And enclosures were always there. They were taking the other land, they are creating good grains. But at this time, the rich landowners, they were getting very rich because they are doing this. They have simple innovations also, and they have a lot of land also. But what happened to the people who were only you can say owning upon, or they were the poor people who had only idea about the commons land, or they are dependent on the commons land. Now enclosures filled the pockets of landlords. But what happened to the poor? The poor now, because they were stopped, because now it is the exclusive property of the landowner. So poor cannot go inside them. They are restricted. So they cannot bring the firewood from the forest. They cannot graze their cattle in the common area which belongs to them previously. They cannot collect any apples, berries. They cannot hunt small animals. That is, whatever is there, they have to buy now. And they were poor. They can't afford to buy it. And in the midlands, that is the area I showed you where the enclosure were 50 and above, because the people were deprived of their rights. So now they moved from the midlands, they moved to the southern counties of England. So this was the region that was most intensively cultivated, and this demanded laborers. So this is how poor went from the common place to the places where they could get some job. Now they have some masters now, and what happened? There was a different you can say following there, different tradition. That is, the laborers would live with the master. They will live with the master in their house only, or their nearby areas. Now in 1800, this practice started disappearing. Laborers were not kept. The laborers don't stay with their masters. They are being paid wages, and they are only employed when the harvest time is there. And the landowners, when they want to make profit, they just spend a meager amount to the workmen. Now the workmen, those people who were dependent on the common area, now they become unemployed. The job is unstable. Then the final nail to the coffin was the introduction of threshing machine. It was war with Napoleon Bonaparte. The price of the food grain were high, and farmers expanded production very vigorously. And now, because the farmers think that the laborers have drinking habits, it is very difficult for them to make them work. They started buying the new threshing machine, and this is their reason was they want to reduce their dependence on the laborers. But after this war ended, thousands of soldiers, which were basically peasants and farmers only, they came back. Now they had no job, because all the threshing machines have taken their job. They don't have any job because the threshing machine could do most of the job which were done by the laborers. So now this was the infuriation, or you can say this, because they were not having any job, they can't even get their livelihood. So this captain swing riot spread in the countryside, and that is how the threshing machine was bad to them. That is the sign of bad times. So what we have seen here today is the modern agriculture when it came in England, that has various changes. The open field, which were called as commons, this disappeared. The rich farmers, they expanded grain production, sold the grain in the world market, they made huge profits and become powerful. But the poor left their villages. They went to from the midlands to the southern counties, where they can get very meager jobs, and the income of laborers were unstable, jobs were insecure, and livelihood was precarious. Last discussion we had for England. What were the condition of peasants and farmers in late 18th and early 19th century? Now I'll discuss about USA, United States of America. And in this place, the modern agriculture took place, that is, the uh, modernization of agriculture took place, because of which the name bread basket was given to this place. Now, what was this bread basket? At the same time, where the common fields were enclosed, the boundary were being made, and that too, you can say, supported by the government in England, that is at the end of the 18th century. In USA, the agriculture was not that popular, you can say, or not being done. If you need to know the situation here, this is the map or a thematic map showing that forests cover over 800 million acres and grasslands 600 million acres. So this is the vegetation, forest and grasslands in USA before the westward expansion of white settlers. So previously there were only natives living here, right? And these are the names of the, say, the native, those used to inhabit this place, those communities, native communities. Now let me take some of the names like Blackfoot, Crow, Mandan, Cheyenne, Pawnee, Shawnee, Iroquois, and this Chickasaw, Comanche, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. Now, the basic thing is, at that time, if you see this dark green, these are the forest vegetation. Little less green is the tall grasses area, and these are short grasses, and these are deserts. So most of the landscape were not under the control of white Americans. Till the 1780s, these white American settlements, they were only confined to this small strip here, very small strip. They used to live here. But the nomadic, that is those who were the natives here, they used to live in these places. As I showed you, these are the various regions they inhabit, and they used to do like hunting, gathering fishes, and they used to cultivate corn, beans, tobacco and pumpkin, and some were expert trappers, and they would sell to European traders the supplies of beaver fur in the 16th century. And these are the location, as I told you, these are different tribes which were here, the natives. But if you see that this is 1920, the agriculture belts in USA is shown here. This is the area of wheat area. There are other belt also like corn belt, corn and wheat belt. So mostly wheat areas are like this. Other regions like pasture region, this is the cotton belt, and this is the subtropical coast. Then we have desert, etc. here. Mostly this is the region we will talk about. And the landscape now, by the early 20th century, it changed dramatically, radically. Now the Americans, that is the white Americans, those were only staying here. Now they shifted to the west, and they displaced the local tribes. The USA had come to dominate the world market in agriculture produced, mainly the grains. So how does it happen, and what happened to the natives? We'll talk about that. So as I said, there was a westward move, and the story of this agrarian expansion, that is the expansion of the whites, is very much connected to the westward movement of the white settlers who took over the land. There was a war, American Independence War from 1775 to 1783, and then USA was formed, United States of America. The white Americans now begin to move westward. That is, from this place now they started moving to the west side. And at this time, Thomas Jefferson, he became the president of USA in 1800, and over 700, you can say 7 lakhs, 700,000 white settlers had moved onto the Appalachian Plateau through various passes. Right? Now they moved and they turned these land into cultivated fields. Now forest timber could be cut for export, animal hunted for skin, mountains mined for gold and minerals. That means that American Indians had to be cleared from the land. Basically, the natives were called as Indians. The natives, that the tribes, different tribes I showed you, they were called as Indians. So they need to be moved. Now, in 1800, the US government made policies driving these natives, those who were inhabiting for so long, American Indians, they were shifted westwards. That is, first beyond the river Mississippi and then further west. Most of them waged war and they were massacred. Many houses or villages were burned. The Indians actually resisted. That is, most of the Indians, they were killed and their houses were burned, villages were burned, but the Indians resisted. But they had some victories, but ultimately they were forced to sign certain treaties, and they had to give their land, and they moved westward. So this is the area, if you see the expansion of the whites. This is the area they used to live, that is the white settlement, only very small strip. In 1775, now they expanded the area. In the 1850, they came here also, even expanded the area, and finally, by 1920, all blue, that is all white settlement. Now, as the Indian, they retreated, the settlers came in and they settled on the Appalachian Plateau, that is the settlers, white settlers, by the first decade of the 18th century. Then they also moved into Mississippi Valley between 1820 and 1850. Now they burned and slashed and cut the forest, pulled out the stumps. They wanted to cultivate, so they cleared the land for cultivation. That is, forests were being cleared, and they cleared large area, and also they made a boundary, that is, they erected fence around their field. And now those fields, they are sowing corn and wheat. If I can show you the house, this is the sod house in the frontier, just for an example, that this house is made by mud and the grass. There is a word called sod, pieces of earth with grass. So this is the house being made by grass of the white settlers. In the early years, what happened? The soil was fertile, so there were good crops. But when the soil loses or lost its fertility, that is, it was impoverished and exhausted, the migrant would move now even to the west. They wanted new land, and they wanted to raise new crops. And only after 1860s, these settlers swept into the Great Plains across the river Mississippi, and then after that, the region which we are talking about became the major wheat producing area of America. That is, wheat producing basket of which we started. That is why we started saying bread basket, because at this time, this region is the major wheat producing area of America. So we need to understand how this happened. How America was being called as the bread basket of America, and what were the challenges they faced, what were the consequences happened. So we will talk about these farmers. This is a very typical family on Sunday afternoon, showing a picture of Great Plains of Dakota in the first decades of the 20th century. So the wheat farmers, there was a dramatic expansion in the late 19th century of wheat production in USA. The urban population was growing in USA, and the export market was also becoming higher, even bigger. As the demand was increasing for the food, wheat prices were increasing, and this encouraged the farmers to produce even more wheat. And then came the railway. When the railway came, it was easy now to transport the grain from the wheat growing regions for export to the eastern coast. So this again became higher, and during the First World War, when Russia's supplies were cut off from the Europe, now the Europe is dependent on USA for its feed, for all the grains, etc., and the wheat. I'll just tell you one sentence which US President Wilson said that will sum up this all. That plant more wheat. He urged the farmers that plant more wheat. Wheat will win the war. So in 1910, 45 million acres of land expanded after 9 years to 75 million acres for wheat. That is around 65% enhancement. And most of the increase was in Great Plains, where there were new areas and they were plowed to extend the cultivation. And if you can imagine, big farmers, they own more than 2,000 to 3,000 acres of land, one person. So this was the age of new technology. They used the new technology, they invented new technology, right? That is, previously they used to do everything using the hand, and those areas which we are talking about, those land have very tough roots. Those grass were having tough roots, and so in order to break this sod and turn the soil over for plowing, means making it fit for the cultivation, new plows were devised locally. Some of them, if you see here, they were 12 feet long, and their front rested on a small wheel, if you see, and they were hitched onto 6 yokes of oxen or 6 horses. I'll show you a picture also. Now with this, by the early 20th century, farmers in the Great Plains, which we are talking about, they were actually breaking the ground with tractors and disc plows. They were clearing vast stretches for wheat cultivation. But once this is done, once crop is being ripened, there is always a need to harvest. And as I said previously, they used cradle or sickle before the 1830s, and this would need a lot of men to work for, women to work for. But there was an event, or you can say a creation. In 1831, Cyrus McCormick, he invented the first mechanical reaper. This mechanical reaper would cut in one day the same amount of crop that 16 men with sickle would do. So now they have technology, and with these machines, 500 acres of wheat could be harvested in just 15 days, 2 weeks. So now, apart from this, the new machines were there, and they were able to cultivate so much, and the work could be done quickly with bare number of hands, means minimum number of labor. And as we said, that these machines were power driven machinery, and only 4 men could plow, seed and harvest all the 3 things, 2,000 to 4,000 acres of wheat in just one season. So this was the level of technology being used, and that is why people, that is the labor, was not required. So this shows what happened to the poor. So before we go what happened to the poor, let me tell you what the scene or the event, what we need to know in the pictorial form. So this was the era where the sickles or the hand were used to cut the grass. to prepare the field. Then after that, these are the breaking plows before the age of mechanization. See, so many horses, etc. are being used here. Then here we have the technology, seeding with drills and tractors. This is a highland farm in North Dakota, 1910. And here we have more advancement. This is breaking the ground on the Great Plains in North Dakota, 1910. So this is called the Minneapolis steam tractor. Now what happened to the poor? The only thing is that because the machinery came, the poor farmer, because they couldn't find job, so now they can't find the job and they face trouble. And there was a case that the production has expanded rapidly because of the mechanization, and during the war also and post-war years also. Now the grain or the wheat was in surplus. It was so much that the storehouses overflowed with grain. Animal would feed means people were giving them to animal, and wheat prices fell because of the immense you can say stock, and export markets collapsed. And which we learned in the previous discussion, the Great Agrarian Depression in 1930s in USA, this has come. That is, this was one of the reasons why this happened, because of the you can say surplus amount of wheat, because of the people were making it, people were cultivating it, and the laborers were less. Laborers are required less. So this happened to the poor. Now one more thing happened. Dust bowl. This is a twister. This is a black blizzard in western Kansas, which was pictured on 14th April 1935. So this blizzard can show you what is the gravity, what is the impact it will have on these very small, tiny looking homes and the fields. In 1930s, how the breadbasket changed to dust bowl. So in 1930s, terrifying dust storms, as you see here, began to blow over the southern plains. These blizzard rolled in very often 7,000 to 8,000 high feet. They were monstrous waves of muddy water. They come day after day through 1930s. And when they came, these skies darkened like it is a night time. The dust would swept in, people are blinded, choked, cattle are suffocated to death because the lung caked or filled with dust and mud. And all the things like the birds and animals, even the fish died. And the tractors and machine which the people owned or the farmer owned were just clogged with dust, and they were damaged beyond repair. So this is a picture being made by Alexander Home. He presented what happened when the blizzard passes, when the blizzard is over. Everything vanishes. Every thing is unusable now. Now, what had gone wrong? Why this blizzard has taken place? See, the main idea is in the early 1930s, there were persistent drought because the rain failed and the temperature became very higher. The temperatures soared. Now, the wind blew with ferocious speed. If there is ordinary dust storms, this will not cause that much harm. But because the land were so open, the wheat cultivation, because if you have say trees or some grass, those roots will hold the soil. But now because there were huge number of land of cultivation and there were no grass there, no trees, these upper soil, you can say, the soil on the crust, they will come up with this dust storm and this will cause the black blizzard. So this is an idea that many people think that this is the reason why this black blizzard came. So after that, really the US people and everyone realized that they need to respect the ecological conditions because they were just cultivating wheat without even thinking about the result, and this result was black wizard. This is how the bread basket converted to the dust bowl. What we discussed in earlier discussion was the situation of peasants and farmers in England and USA, and the differences were there, but certain similarities were also there. Now we'll talk about India. And as we know, after the Battle of Plassey in 1757, British rule was gradually established in India, and this was the colonial rule. The things changed, specifically the farmer life and the landscape. The British saw this land or the revenue which they are getting from land as the major source of government income. For that, because they wanted a regular system of land revenue, so they just expanded the area under cultivation. And because of this, once the area of cultivation increases, the area will come from where? It will come from forest and pastures. So the area of the forest and pastures, they declined. And this created various problems for peasants and pastoralists. Because of the very strict rules and regulations, by this rule, the forest and grazing was restricted, and also there are certain more problems which these peasants, farmers, they faced, and other people who were actually, we talked about nomadic also at that time. Now, the crop which Indian people or the Indian peasant and farmers they grow, it was totally dependent now in the colonial rule with respect to the world. That is, in the early 19th century, indigo and opium, these were the two of the major commercial crops. Indigo and opium. So we are going to talk a lot about this opium. And after that, by the end of the century, that is the 19th century, the cash crops, that is sugarcane, cotton, jute, wheat, there are other crops which are exported in order to feed whom? In order to feed Europe, in order to feed, or you can say supply, the mills of Lancashire and Manchester in England. So how this Indian cultivators, when the modern world or international commerce or trade or export took place, how does Indian cultivators respond? This is we are going to talk with an example of one crop opium. One crop opium. So we'll be talking about Bengal area where and how this opium came into picture. So this all started with certain other thing. That is, this is an after effect, or this was the one of the thing which took place because of certain things which are going on the other place. What are the other places? China and England. Now the history of this opium, as I said, is linked with the story of British trade in China. In the late 18th century, the English East India Company, it was buying tea and silk from China. They take tea and silk from China and they send it or take it to England. This is what East India Company was doing. And this tea, Chinese tea was very famous and popular drink there. If you see the growth of these drinkers, or you can say import, that is in 1785, about 15 million pound of tea was being imported to England. Whereas by 1830, the figure jumped from 15 million pounds to 30 million pounds. And of course, East India Company was making profits. And this was totally dependent on the tea trade, tea trade. But there was a problem. The problem was that the Confucian rurals of China, Manchus, they were suspicious about the foreign entry because East India Company belonged to England. And they just don't want to open their market or allow the foreign goods to enter. So now in this situation, how the East India Company is going to get the tea? Because there has to be a balance in trade. If you take tea, you have to give something. You have to give something. So the idea was, the solution was, while they were buying tea, they are paying the Chinese in silver coins or bullion. But again, there was a problem. The problem was that the English people, they thought that if you are giving silver coins to the Chinese for the trade of or trading of tea, then this silver coins, there is a loss of treasure. You are giving silver coins from our treasure, and this will impoverish the nation and deplete the nation, that is English wealth. So you cannot do that. What could be the commodity they could sell, that is the East Indian Company or the others, they could sell in China in order to buy tea? So there need to be some commodity, and the commodity was opium, afim. See, the Portuguese actually introduced this opium into China in early 16th century, but at that time it was just used for medical properties and in the medicines. And the Chinese were well aware of that this opium is an addiction. It, you can only sell, or the emperor has only allowed it for the medicinal purposes, nothing else. But there was illegal trade from the Western merchants in mid-18th century. They were just taking the opium and sending it or selling it to the local agents of China in number of seaports of southern eastern China. If you see what was the trade, by the early 1820s, about 10,000 crates were being annually smuggled into China. And if you take the number in some 15 years after, this 10,000 crates changed to 35,000 crates of opium being unloaded every year in Chinese soil, right? So there was a triangular trade. I will just talk about this triangular trade just in a bit. So now the English also did that. The English needed the Chinese tea, so they thought, okay, why not to give them opium in trade, in exchange. So people of all class now, because English were just now trading with opium, people of all class, because this illegal trading was going on, the people of all classes, may it be the shopkeepers, peddlers, army men, aristocrats, paupers, everyone was addicted because of this illegal trade. I told you about the numbers. Now English, as I said, they also found an idea. Why not to exchange the opium in exchange of tea? Lin Zexu, he was a commissioner at Canton. This is an area in China. In 1839, he estimated that 4 million opium smokers are there in China. And a British doctor also, he put the figure close to 12 million. So now, as the country, that is the Chinese country, become the addicted country, British trade in a tea flourished, and the return was, of course, opium. So the return from opium sale financed the tea purchases in China. So where did this opium come from? Now, English want opium. They want to send it to China. They want opium in order to send it to China because they want tea in return. So there was a triangle, and this triangle, this is England, this is China, which is the third country. This opium came from India. So now I'll go back to this triangular trade. See, this is England, this is China, and this is Calcutta, India. Now the British were taking the opium from Calcutta or Bengal or India, and now they are trading it with the Chinese and taking the tea back to England. This is the triangular trade. But the thing was, how did opium come from? As I said, it will come from India. when British actually conquered Bengal, they made a very determined effort in order to grow opium. In which lands? Because they now conquered Bengal. So the areas which are under their control, they wanted to produce opium. And as we just saw, that the opium expanded, the market of opium was too much in China. Larger volumes of opium is going from Bengal ports to China. See, before 1767, just 500 chests of two mounds. See, one mound is mound is a measure of weight. One mound or one seir is this one mun. This is called mun. One mound or mun is 40 seers or 40 seir. One seir is just little less than a kg. So before 1767, just 500 chests exported from India, but just in 4 years, it trebled. Means in 100 years, in 1870, this is 1767 and 1870, around 100 years gap, the government was exporting this, English were exporting 50,000 chests annually. They were exporting it. So now supplies need to be increased because the export trade was booming. The opium has to be cultivated. So how these Indians or Indian cultivators are to be persuaded? There are various reasons for which they were unwilling to turn their field over to poppy, that is to grow opium. What was the reason? So we'll take the reason one by one. You need to understand there are certain points, four reasons basically. So the first reason is the crop had to be grown on the best land, that is always near the villages and well manured. And these are the areas where peasants, they produce pulses. Now they cannot grow pulses there. If they even grow, the pulses will be inferior. This was the first reason why they were unwilling. The peasants were unwilling. First is that the opium needs a very fertile land. Secondly, many cultivators own no land, so they have to lease the land from the landlords. But the rent charged by these landlords are quite high, especially in the area nearby the villages. So this is the second cause or second reason why they were unwilling. The third is the cultivation of opium is itself a very challenging and difficult process. Plants are very delicate. Cultivators had to spend long hours. They don't have enough time to care for other crops. This is the fourth reason. And finally, the price of the government paid to the cultivators who are growing opium was very low, right? It was an unprofitable job for them. So if you see, there are four reasons. First, why they were unwilling. First, the crop needs fertile land and it needs to be near villages and well manured. And then if you take the second one, to cultivate, because they had no land, so they have to take the land from in lease from the landlords, and these cultivators own no land. This is the second reason. Third reason is cultivation of opium was very difficult process by itself, and third, the price the government gave them was very low. So these are the four reasons. So how these unwilling cultivators were made to accept to produce opium? The idea was to give the money in advance, because the rural areas, Bengal and Bihar, they were poor peasants. They don't have money enough to buy food and clothing. So if the money is given in advance, that is, the village headman is given money and they will offer a loan to the cultivators, and those who don't have money and they are getting the money in the advance, they will be tempted. So they are tempted because the present problem is solved because of fooding and clothing. So that is why they took the loan, and once they took the loan, the thing is they will be like bandua mazdoor, means they have to work for those people from whom they have taken loan, and they can only grow the crop, and once they grow the crop, the agents will cut the crop. They have no right of cutting the crops or selling it to anyone else, and the price were very, very low offered to them. And this, as I said, that government was reluctant to increase the price of opium, because the price, they want this production of opium to be very cheap, and they want to sell it to a very high price to the opium agents. So the difference of the cheap rate of production and high price of giving it to the agents in Calcutta, the difference is actually their revenue. So this happened, and the peasants, because they were angry, they are not getting any money, so they just refused to take advances. And people, if you see an example in Benares, they stopped growing opium. They produced sugarcane and potatoes instead. And they would even sell their crop to the traveling traders, that is paikars, who are offering them high prices. Now by 1773, the British government has all the control on the opium. No one can, means anybody else than the government is permitted to trade this. So if you see the central India and Rajasthan, those territories which were not the British territories, the opium production was increasing. Why? Because the local traders were offering much higher prices to peasants and exporting opium to China, rather than what British government is giving to the peasants who are under their control. So now the British thought it to be illegal. They wanted to stop it. It was smuggling for them. So they instructed its agent posted in the princely state to confiscate all the opiums and destroy all the crops. So there was a conflict always between British government, peasants and local traders, as long as the opium production lasted. Now, if you see that the experience what we saw is all peasants in colonial India were like that for opium cultivators. It is not like that. These opium cultivators have a different experience, and there are other cultivators also, like they have different experiences. In conclusion, what I can say is we talked about England, USA and India. So the idea is that the pattern was changing. Somewhere it was you can say new machines, somewhere there were machines, and somewhere it is the trade, basically the trade which influenced or affected or introduced the new crop which were being grown, and how the colonial rule or the people who owned the trade did to peasants and farmers, and how did they react. This is what we saw in this discussion, and this is just a picture of the packed chest of opium being taken to Ghazipur railway station in the 19th century. So this is all about this topic. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself.